Welcome to another edition of Whiteboard Insanity, where I'm going to be going over all the things that I've been kind of indulging myself with after I tried to read The Siege of Terra, trying to palate cleanse myself a little bit, and discuss some interesting books and other things that I think would be interesting for people to watch that are not Warhammer, but also really, really interesting. The first series that I actually ended up reading that was outside of Warhammer in the last little bit, besides like Red Rising, just because I kind of love going over it, was actually the Sun Eater series. I don't know where my recommendation for this came from. I feel like it just kind of popped up in the ephemerum of things. Mostly people were saying that it's kind of, especially like what to read after Red Rising, so I was kind of interested in seeing whatever the hell this thing is. So far it's 6 books. The 7th book is going to be coming out in, I think, in the next year or so. And this is good. This is good. And this is actually, like, the reason why I think this series has actually been pretty good is kind of where I think Warhammer could be going with things. Warhammer could be good, mostly because it has that depth of lore to it. You have so much history that is in Warhammer that would be really interesting if it was cohesive, but nothing is cohesive. Everything is changing, everything's in flux. Nothing can be like trusted. You never know when something might change. Whereas I find I started reading Sun Eater, and I'll be honest, it's very, very slow to start. It doesn't really go anywhere in the first book, kind of nowhere in the second book, but it has this vibe that you kind of start getting, especially in the second book, and then it just kind of ramps up from there. And it's very good for that reason. But what I think is interesting about it is the way that it actually deals with lore and just world building in general. Christopher Rucchio is very good at making languages make sense, if that kind of makes sense. He has quite a few different like kind of conlangs, or at least like languages that he's just making up on the go, because you have obviously like things like Cielson. I don't know how to spell these things because I read them through audiobook. The narrator in that is actually really fantastic as well, so props on that as well. Like there's Cielson, Gastani, Stani, and like Judian, and all these other like little languages, but it's fantastic because it's set, I think, about 20,000 years into the future, roughly. But he makes quotes and specifically says them as classical English. So there's a sense that our world is actually a part of this lore of this world. It exists. Old Earth exists. It is mentioned multiple times, but mostly in the fact that it just became a burnt husk. Woo! Yay! But the lore of it is very, what I would think of with the lore is that it's, part of where I was going with the last video was how much lore in Warhammer ended up being the dominant factor of everything. It wasn't about the narrative or what was being said in the moment, especially with the Siege of Terra. It was about, this is an event that happened. You know what happens, but it doesn't play on that in any kind of way. It just kind of goes, these are the events that happened, they're going these like logical order, and you could get most of what you want from that from a wiki. Whereas Sun Eater plays itself off as if what is happening is history. Because it literally starts off, I'm gonna get another color because I like colors. Where's the blue? It literally starts off with the main character, Hadrian, saying he is 1,300 years old. He is the bad guy. And he's writing his memoirs to set the record straight of what his actual story is. Because he has lived for 1,300 years, he has been known throughout the galaxy as the bad person. He genocided Cielsons, which is where this language comes from, but he genocided them full-heartedly. And it starts that off just saying, I destroyed a sun. I collapsed it and immediately destroyed the entire species of Cielson and killed trillions of humans. I am the villain of this story. And this is my story, and I start from the very beginning when he was like, what, 19? That's where it starts off. But everything that ends up as a part of the narrative is the actual, all the things that are the lore are actually part of the narrative. They're important to what is happening in the story at that time. So you have instances where it's a discussion about what happened to Old Earth. What happened to it? Well, you're not told it in any kind of weird, like, oh, in the annals of history, Old Earth, we fought each other and destroyed it. No, it's directly tied with the narrative of what is actually happening in the story of why was Old Earth a burnt husk? Why is there a God Emperor? Well, there isn't a God Emperor. There is an Emperor. The God Emperor was the original one that did the burning of Earth. Earth doesn't exist because the God Emperor William came along and destroyed it. But the reason why it happened is actually fundamentally tied in with the narrative of the story overall. It's not just a side fact that can just kind of be slotted in at any point. Knowing why it happened depends on where you are in the narrative and how it is important to Hadrian throughout the entire thing. But all that aside, in terms of lore, the character of Hadrian is actually what I think drives the story the most, mainly because, one, you are getting it from his perspective the entire time. So everything that you see of his faults and everything, even when he is acknowledging his faults and acknowledging he is going through a really shitty time, you're kind of, there's this bias that you see the entire time, and especially when you know that Hadrian is not a good person, like, at all. He's kind of a dick. Like, I'll be very blunt about it, especially with the very beginning. It is just straight up Dune. But Christopher Rucchio I've seen a couple things about his discussion where he just straight up rips things, and it's things that he likes from science fiction. So I'll give him a pass just to start off with, because it does start off with, you have shields that slow things can go through. Dune. You have lightsabers, which are really cool, high matter swords, but that's Star Wars. Nonetheless, it starts off on the planet. He has going to potentially lose his airship. You have the mentor that's there, which is kind of like a mentat. You have all these like small things that just feel out of weird, and just, if you've read Dune, it's basically just this beginning of Dune, but it does diverge. And it has a lot of like a Roman feel to everything. You have gladiators, and you have colosseums, you have the emperor, you have the far reach lands where there's constantly war, and the legionnaires that are passed through each and every single like one of those areas. It's really interesting. But Hadrian, I looked it up, and Christopher Rucchio even mentioned that he wanted to make Anakin Skywalker from the prequel trilogy actually make sense. What does that mean? Well, he's a whiny, witty bitch. He whines about things, but he is very clever. He understands things. He's kind of got quips at times, but it fits more than what we saw in the prequels. As I understand it, with the Clone Wars, it actually played a little bit more into Anakin's character, where he was less of the whiny bitch aspect of it, and more of the witty, caring about his friends, caring about everything. And it's really fun to watch Hadrian kind of grow, but at the same time, you start seeing how flawed he is fundamentally, because he's also arrogant. And not in the way that you usually like someone to be arrogant in your story. So it's a lot of fun. If you want a long-term story to read that is got a lot to chew on, with some really kind of interesting reveals later on, especially when it comes to Old Earth, there's a particular like linguistic drift that has happened, that when you start realizing what happened with Old Earth, it becomes really funny, really quickly, and you also, it pulls in some other stories to kind of build out that backdrop. When you know it, you know it. But again, I'm going to recommend it. I've been reading it. I actually read all of the 6 books that are available. I think it was like 150 hours of the audio. No, I think it was more than that. Either way, I absorbed the entire audiobook series that is available until book 7 comes out. Highly recommend it. It's been good. It's been good. And seeing a flawed character with good lore that is subservient to the narrative. I just had some fluff that just came out of nowhere, so a cat now apparently. This has been fun. I really enjoyed this. It had low points where it felt a little bit too slow, especially the first book. But once you hit book 3 was a lot. And then I think it was book 5, Ashes of Man, and then whatever book 6 was. Yeah, Kingdom of Death. That book hurt at a fundamental level and was hard to get through. But book 3 is where things kick off and you start seeing more things. And there's a particular power that kind of appears, which I kind of latched on to a little bit. I don't want to give things away, but I really like it, and it's kind of fitting into kind of views of where like physics are now and like quantum level things, which sounds hokey, but it actually fits in the way that we understand quantum mechanics and the way that we fit in the idea of statistical idealization of quantum mechanics, because all really quantum mechanics is a statistical, where something might be statistically, and that can deviate depending on how things interact with. Anyway, I'm going too deep into it. I've actually read outside of fiction. Maybe I'll get to that. But yes, Sun Eater. Good shit. Next series that I'm actually just about to finish. I think I'm about 2-3 hours off in the audiobooks to finish the series, but Mistborn. Why did I start reading Mistborn all of a sudden? I have been one of those people that I'm much more in line with science fiction for the longest time. I like hard science fiction. The Expanse is one of my favorite series overall, just because it is so hard and it tries to keep to realism as much as possible, even when things kind of go insane, especially in the later series. There's slightly off track, but there is a point in which I think it was book 8. I think it was book 8. Which one was it? I think it might have been Tiamat. No, it's not Tiamat's Wrath. Yes, it is Tiamat's Wrath. But there's a point where there's a group of people in a room and something insane happens. Something that just beggars belief of everything. And there's like 4 or 5 people there. And a military guy, calm, like very good on like keeping on the battle. He's the admiral. He stands there, he watches this happen, and he just goes, okay, you, come with me. And they walk out the door. He just saw one of the most insane things to ever happen, and he just gathers everyone up calmly, takes them outside, and then starts to somewhat freak out about the insanity that just happened. It just, the kind of contrast that was, it stuck in my mind, and it's still one of my favorite scenes. I love it, and I am so excited for when they actually maybe adapt that. I don't know if they will, because they kind of finished off with the gates finally be open. Anyway, all aside, Mistborn is one of those, and Sanderson in general has been on my radar, but not really someone that I've been kind of interested in reading. Maybe that's because I wasn't too deep into the epic fantasy. I have a couple series that I have read that I really enjoyed. I have gone through A Song of Ice and Fire. I really liked Brent Works. His first series, the Night Angel trilogy, I really liked. And I did actually, I have, where is it? Blood Mirror. I actually really liked that series quite a bit. It got kind of weird at times, but I really enjoyed it. Color was fun. But Sanderson, I think it's because I never got into the Wheel of Time and read his final aspect of that series that I just never got into him. And I don't know. I actually have watched his series of how to write, so his lecture series. He has the entire course online. Yes, it is from BYU. Who cares? Mormons can Mormon. But he has the entire writing course online, so you can actually watch his lectures. And he's fascinating. I love the way that he kind of interacts with things, but I've never read any of his books. So I finally, as my palate cleanser, I decided, you know what? I'm finally going to dive into it. I've heard his ideas on the fact that science fiction and fantasy are basically the same thing, which I have heard that Wheel of Time basically is science fiction, but is the fantasy wrapping. So I was really fascinated in how that kind of worked. So I decided I'll go with Mistborn. He kind of recommends it as a beginning point, and then you go into the Stormlight Archives. Whoops. Burps. He recommends going into Stormlight Archives after you read Mistborn. So I was like, sure, why not? Mainly, I'm really interested in the way that he looks at magic systems, because I kept hearing that he is the magic systems guy. And I even remembered when I was going through his I don't know what the lecture series is called. You'll find it. Brandon Sanderson lecture series. You'll find it. It's really good for going through like story structures and how to tell stories and all that kind of good stuff. But he talks about magic systems and he has his laws. And I just wanted to see how he actually implemented it. And I gotta say, I actually have enjoyed Mistborn so far. He's very crunchy with his magic system. It actually fits because there is a full logic to it, but it's kind of where I've been getting my notion of narrative is the overarching everything. Everything should be underneath narrative and the storytelling that happens to it. Lore, magic, everything is subservient to the narrative. And I wanted to read it because I was very interested in like how he actually implements what I've heard him talk about. And you can tell it all the way through Mistborn. It's got some fun story beats to it. I like the magic system, the push and pull, how things are organized, how there's a cosmological aspect to everything with preservation and ruin, and how things kind of push and pull against one another. I have enjoyed it. I'm almost finished Hero of Ages. I think I'm, like I said, about a couple hours left in the audiobook, but I wanted to get some kind of ideas of where I wanted to go through with some of the projects that I am working on currently and how to interact with it directly. But I wanted to read them specifically because of where I'm going with narrative being the overarching aspect of everything. It is what is more important than lore, than world building, than anything else is what is the story. So, Mistborn's story, fantastic. Vin, fantastic character. His characters are a little bit flat, but I enjoy them. They serve their purposes and they actually do very well. So, another good series. Smile. Now, I'm gonna go into a territory that I usually don't talk about. I haven't talked about it too much on the channel, mainly because I was focusing on Warhammer and I was trying to hold off onto it, but I do always want to talk about shows. And when I originally, okay, hot tea. Okay. When I when I started this channel originally, I kind of wanted to focus on how lore interacts with stories and how it becomes a part of it. And one of the original video ideas that I have, and I think it might still be one of the first videos that I did, was on House of the Dragon. Of the D, whatever. I don't want to write the entire thing out. But I originally did it on House of the Dragon because I was really interested in the kind of cultural perspective of why we're so interested in some of these background events and how those can actually become a spectacle within themselves. And when I watched the first season, I could really tell that that was really important. There was something really interesting about seeing the spectacle of something that we know has finished and how it happened, seeing the actual characters and seeing how things move through it. I was wrong. House of the Dragon is garbage. It's become garbage. And I think it is because outside of production issues, I understand that there was a budgetary concern, so they actually had a decrease in budget. Warner Brothers Discovery, who now owns HBO, who are now turning it into Max or whatever the hell they're calling it, they decreased the budget out of nowhere and only gave them 8 episodes, so they couldn't do everything they need. But there is still an issue when it comes to the actual story, and this is going to be something that comes up with adaptations. And I'm going to make a video on adaptations in particular, because I think even George R.R. Martin's discussion himself about adaptations is really fascinating because it fits in with the Witcher series. And I mean Game of Thrones itself. And other adaptations that have been kind of coming up more frequently that kind of crap all over the original series. They don't like it. They want to tell their own stories. And this kind of lack of respect that comes from it. And that's what's happened with House of the Dragon. I wasn't planning on actually talking about House of the Dragon today. I was going to talk about a couple of other things, but it actually feeds really nicely into why I'm going to enjoy the other 2 things that I will talk about after this. But it is so funny how they could take something that you know what is happening. You know, at the end of House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra dies. Spoiler, who cares? It happened in Game of Thrones. That was what? Game of Thrones came out and the actual quote specifically on Rhaenyra dying to Sunfire's fire. That happened, I believe, while Joffrey was still alive, so that would have been season 4. I think. Because I believe that's when he was talking to, what's her name? Natalie Dormer. Natalie Dormer's character. God, I can't remember. Not House Gardener. It was the people who took over after House Gardener. Why do I have these weird memory things? I can remember House Gardener, who in the lore are the original rulers of the Reach, but when the conquering happened and Aegon the Conqueror came to Westeros, he killed every one that was in House Gardener in the Field of Fire along with the Lannisters, and it was a major breaking point. And the house that takes over, whatever their name is, T, starts with the T. It's not Tully because that's the Riverlands. Why do I have all this in my brain? But I don't have that name, whatever. Besides that, Joffrey actually was talking to her, Natalie Dormer's character, in season 4 about how Rhaenyra was the rightful heir. Her half-brother warred against her. She was cruel and she died to Sunfire. To Sunfire's breath. Why is Sunfire's breath important? This beautiful golden dragon. Because he's dead in House of the Dragon. They killed him. For some reason, they decided it was good to have a throwaway line about how Aegon's dragon is dead, even though Aegon's dragon is supposed to end up at Dragon Keep, Dragon Island. I forgot, I'm bad with names right now. Sunfire ends up there. He is crippled, but he is sitting there, and he burns Rhaenyra at that moment. He can't move. They bring her to him to burn her, but they say he's dead. And Rhaenyra is supposed to be cruel. And then there's this fan fiction that the writers are having. Fan fiction of Rhaenyra and Brainfart, Hightower, Alicent. Alicent and Rhaenyra maybe might have been in love in their past, and that they don't actually hate each other. Yet, I understand it's an adaptation, and the point was that there was a lot of back and forth on historical accuracy because it was the Maesters, a dwarf who was very horny, and someone else that was writing the accounts of the Dance of the Dragons. But everyone agreed that they hated each other. They all hated each other. And yet, apparently, Alicent and Rhaenyra are in love, and they can talk to each other all the time, and it's perfectly fine. Maybe they had one or two moments where like they were having spats and they cut each other and they were about to actually murder each other in front of everyone. No, gone. Season 2. They probably made out when they were teenagers. Anyway. It's garbage. And it saddens me because I think my first video was on House of the Dragon, how people were very interested in something that they already know how things happen in the story. You can have dramatic irony of you know what is going to happen, so it becomes more interesting because you know what will happen, the characters don't, and you have all these interests, but they have to tie things into Game of Thrones, the shit Game of Thrones, obviously, and the shit ending of Song of Ice and Fire, but... And I think this is something that's coming up, especially in, and I don't want to just say, I have to say it kind of Western, but Western adaptations, because I can't just say Hollywood, considering the fact that Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, all of those are being filmed and produced in the UK, essentially. They're kind of an international thing. So it's more about a Western adaptation kind of symptom that I am seeing, where no one cares about the actual original story. They want to tell their own story in the framework of that. And there is some means of the way that you can work with an adaptation, because there is benefits to an adaptation, but there is a method to being faithful that is also important. And that gets me to my other thing that I've been watching, or things that I have been watching, things that I watched, and a thing that I am currently watching. And that is animes. Yes, I'm a weeb. I have been actually watching specifically Dungeon Meshi, Frieren. I only watched Frieren once. I think I've watched Dungeon Meshi at least 3 times. And I am currently going through the second core or season, or however they want to define Oshi No Ko. I am only bringing this up for a point that I will make later, specifically around adaptation, because I think it's very kind of interesting. But Frieren and Dungeon Meshi are adaptations of a manga. They are comic books that have been adapted into animation. They're adaptations that stick to the source material in a way that is faithful. And I think that's something that I've noticed more in especially Japanese culture, is that with anime to manga to anime, is that adaptations seem to be more faithful, more respectful, and more in conversation with their adaptations, or the adaptations are more in conversation with their original story. Frieren in particular, and I find this funny because I was just talking about how I usually watch science fiction. I don't know why I go fantasy when I watch anime. Maybe why I don't watch all that much anime anymore because it's all isekai, and I don't want to watch isekai. It's all gamer crap. But Frieren is a contemplative take on how you live a long life and how powerful you can be, but the people that are around you are the most important in living within the moment. And it sticks with the themes of the manga. It does keep to beats, and I think maybe this also comes down to when it goes from manga to anime is because it is like going from manga to anime is drawings. Like you can actually take and complete cells, like panels, and just use those as your storyboarding. Maybe that makes it a little bit easier, but you could still somewhat do that with a novel or a book to other things. But there just seems to be this need for overriding and fitting it within the, outside of just fitting it with the medium that you were adapting into, but also taking and adding to it yourself. You can add your own, but be faithful to the adaptation, which is what goes wrong with like something like The Witcher and House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. But in particular, like these two shows did such good jobs of conveying the emotions and the themes that actually fit into it. And like even Dungeon Meshi, it's Studio Trigger, they are horny on main 100% of the time. Like they were completely unleashed with Cyberpunk, and with Dungeon Meshi, somehow they toned it down, and the only kind of like fan service-y things that you get are with Senshi. But that's because Senshi is daddy. And I don't regret saying that. But Dungeon Meshi is a good adaptation, and it keeps to, they're just good. But the one that I actually find the most interesting is Oshi No Ko, because Oshi No Ko in particular, I don't want the blue, give me another color. Oshi No Ko in particular has an entire two arcs, two main story beats. One complete arc of the entire story is centered around adaptations. Which I find really neat, because it actually goes in depth of like how a mistranslation of the source material to the original or to the adaptation can happen, and where kind of original authors can feel bogged down by the process. Because you have, what is the name of the, there's one in particular like ROM, or like romantic story or show that is being adapted into a live action, and it's like Kana, and I think Aqua gets involved in the later part of it, but it's the Aka-san is actually describing his own experiences watching his own stories be adapted in a terrible way, because I believe that Kaguya, Love is War was adapted to live action, and he hated it. He hated it so much that he actually put the author's disdain of the actors and the like production process to have it adapted. He put that into Oshi No Ko. He put that into the story as this kind of meta commentary on adaptations. So you have the romantic live action story that was adapted, and it was adapted terribly until like the actors started taking a little bit more cues and becoming a little bit more active with everything. Because they were only looking for people that were pretty, and you ended up having this kind of disconnect. But then you have the 2.5D Tokyo Blades arc. Tokyo Blade arc. That there's an entire like episode that is dedicated to the adaptation process and that disconnect, because Goa, the writer for the 2.5D play, which I didn't know was a thing, and I think it's actually kind of really cool. And I would love to see it. I think we may end up going to Japan at some point, so I might want to see it, but I don't know Japanese, so maybe not, but if they could bring it here. But it's basically you have a circular audience, like where the seating is, that's circular, and you have the stage that is 360 degrees around it. So the audience actually rotates to different stage portions of it. So it's kind of like this is the audience, and there's like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and the audience just kind of goes, all right, we're going this way. Oh, scene transition. It's 2.5 because they're usually adopting manga and anime. It's because it's 2.5 instead of 3D. Whatever. But there's the entire episode is the writer knows how to write for the play, for the stage. So Goa knows how to write for it. The manga artist, who is basically on a crunch 90% of the time, and my God, I would not want to have her life because she seems to be like every day just working on burps. Every day she's just working on her own, trying to figure out the story, do the drawing, do the writing, do the coloring, do the backgrounds, do everything. And she comes in and she is completely salty about it. But the reason why the adaptation wasn't working, and she was really disappointed, you could tell some of the actors really liked the story. They liked the original manga. They liked the characters, and they were disappointed with the way the characters were actually being written, which comes back to like the Witcher series, where Henry Cavill really liked playing Geralt. He likes the series a lot. So when they were making changes that he didn't agree with or that were different, they eventually fire him and replace him with Liam something. Hemsworth, yes. But you have the actors that are really interested. The original author is confused, but it's because it's a giant game of telephone between the original author, the OA, goes to her editor and gives notes about the script thing. That goes to the producer, which then goes to the director, which then goes to Goa, who is the author of the play, or the scriptwriter. You watch the steps that it takes to go through this process, and you see, like, she's angry. She's angry. She has a lot of like issues with like the way the script is being written and some of the dialogue. The editor tones it down and says, okay, well, I don't want to go to the producers and tell them anything bad. So it gets to the producers. Well, the producers are like, well, we can kind of see her means, but let's tone it down. It goes to the director. Director is like, well, whatever they're telling me is kind of okay. Goes to Goa. Well, Goa, like what is being told to him, he's super happy about things. Minor changes, nothing that he really needs to do, or there is something that they are legitimately changing in terms of what she is saying, and the game of telephone just makes it worse. And it doesn't fix itself until the original author and the writer sit down together and actually hash things out and decide to actually delete things. Because she doesn't know how to write for the play. Goa knows how to write for the play. But that process is what I think happens with all these adaptations in the West, but no one fixes it because they're all idiots. It's this corporate structure of like just trying to kiss ass all the way up. Corporates suck. I don't know how this ended up being a rant about adaptations, but it is. But I will do a whole thing on adaptations. I'm actually really curious about the process of how things do get adapted and the rights that actually pass from the original author to whoever these people are. And especially the control, because George R.R. Martin has come out and basically said that he took his hands off of it. He sold the rights to it, but there seems to be a little bit of a formality that was in place for him to come on and write some of the episodes or give some of his input, but then he steps away and he gets upset because it doesn't work out the way they want to. And I think talking about that process would be really fascinating, and to see where adaptations have actually been better, where adaptations have been worse, and also the entire legal process. I'm kind of curious about it. It's something maybe I want to talk about. But this actually comes to an interesting point with Red Rising, because Pierce Brown has actively been trying to talk to people about the rights for it, and he has been very strict about who actually gets the rights. When he has sold the rights to it, he has always had a clause in it that he has creative control over the actual output of the adaptation. So it is taking a little bit longer for that to come out. I know people wanted that to be animation. I'm interested to see how that eventually comes out, but it's cool. Adaptations are a fun and messy subject, but Oshi No Ko, I would recommend if you're very interested in the kind of meta commentary of how stories are actually produced, because it goes into the entire entertainment industry in Japan, but I feel there's a lot of things that actually kind of excel outside of just Japan, because this process sounds accurate for how some adaptations have come out on TV series. So that's all I've got. I'll probably be doing, like I said, an episode or a video specifically on adaptations at some point, but what I would like to do next is I'm actually going to be going over Ethos. So Ethos is the kind of world that I've been working on for a while. I have some of the world building, but now I have, I think, the structure to look at it from a narrative perspective, and I would love to share it with everyone and kind of go through the process, because I want to go from the very beginning. I have some rough drafts that I've written multiple times, but I'd love to go through the entire process with you, all of you. You in particular, Emu, I'm watching you. But I would like to go through the process and see how we can actually make a story that talks about the narrative, and the narrative is the high point. And make this be my journey of actually getting Ethos out as an entire story. I've also decided that if I ever name these books, I'm gonna try and make sure that they are not in the fantasy structure, because I hate acronyms. I've been trying to read things about, I don't have it on here anymore, about the Sun Eater series, and every time I look at the discussions, they acronymize the names of the books, and I keep getting lost. And I can't get into the discussion, but I can get into the discussion, but it just annoys me. So I want to try and make sure that I can acronymize the names of my... Nonetheless, thank you for coming along with my journey of insanity with the whiteboard. I love you, whiteboard. Bye.